I grew up in a small town where English was more of an abstract concept than a practical skill. Hardly anyone around me spoke it fluently, and opportunities to use it in everyday life were almost non-existent. For most of my life, English felt like something distant, something I'd hear in movies or see in textbooks, but never truly engage with. Still, deep down, I had a dream. I wanted to study abroad. I wanted to see the world, meet people from different cultures, and experience life beyond the familiar streets of my hometown. I knew that learning English was the key to unlocking that dream, but it always seemed so far out of reach. Whenever I thought about mastering the language, I felt overwhelmed. Where would I even start? How could I possibly become fluent when I had no real environment to practice in? Then, one day, everything changed. I came across an opportunity, a scholarship to study in an English-speaking country. It sounded like a dream come true, but there was one big catch. I had to pass an English proficiency test in just 6 months. 6 months. The thought was almost laughable. My English at the time was so basic that I could barely form a proper sentence, let alone write an essay or understand a fast-paced conversation. The idea of going from nearly zero to a passing score in half a year seemed impossible. For a moment, I almost gave up before I even started. The logical part of me told me that it couldn't be done, that I would only embarrass myself by trying. But then I asked myself, what do I have to lose? If I didn't try, I already knew what the outcome would be. But if I gave it everything I had, maybe, just maybe, I could surprise myself. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I committed to this goal with everything in me. No more doubting, no more hesitating. I was going to push myself in ways I never had before. I didn't have the luxury of time, so I had to be intentional about every step. I knew this wouldn't be easy, and I had no idea if I'd actually succeed. But one thing was clear: I wasn't going to let fear decide my future. And so, with nothing but determination and a deep desire to change my life, I took my first step on what would become one of the most challenging, yet rewarding journeys of my life. Once I made the decision to commit to learning English, I knew I had to build a system that would work for me. I didn't have access to fancy language schools or private tutors, so I had to be creative with the resources I had. I started small, with one simple goal: learn 10 new English words every single day. It might not sound like much, but for me, it was a starting point, something I could stick to consistently. I wrote down the words in a notebook, repeated them out loud, and tried to use them in my daily thoughts. To make English a constant part of my life, I labeled everything in my room with sticky notes: the door, the window, the lamp, even my toothbrush. It was kind of silly at first, but it helped me connect words with real objects, not just memorize them from a list. I also changed the language on my phone to English, so that even my daily habits like checking messages or setting alarms became moments of learning. Music and movies played a huge role too. I started listening to English songs and reading the lyrics at the same time to catch the meaning and pronunciation. Then I moved on to watching movies and shows with English subtitles. At first, I didn't understand much, but I kept watching, pausing, rewinding, and slowly I began to recognize patterns and phrases. It was frustrating, sure, but also exciting. Every time I understood a joke or caught a phrase I had learned, it felt like a small win. Another thing I did was mimic accents and speech patterns. I'd pause a video, repeat what I heard out loud, and try to match the rhythm and tone. I probably sounded ridiculous, but over time, this helped me improve my pronunciation and feel more confident speaking. What I learned early on is that consistency is more important than perfection. I didn't need to get everything right immediately. I just needed to keep showing up every day. Even if I could only study for 30 minutes, I made sure it was focused and meaningful. Some days were harder than others. There were times when nothing seemed to stick, but I reminded myself that progress isn't always obvious in the moment. By surrounding myself with English in my environment, in my routines, and in my entertainment, the language slowly became less foreign. It became part of my everyday life. And that's when I started to believe that fluency wasn't just a dream, it was actually possible. Even though I had set clear goals and was working hard every day, the road wasn't smooth. In fact, there were days when I felt like I wasn't improving at all. I would study for hours, only to forget everything the next day. Sometimes the words felt like they were all blending together, and I couldn't make sense of anything I was reading or hearing. It was frustrating, really frustrating. There were moments I questioned why I was even trying. Maybe I wasn't smart enough. Maybe English just wasn't for me. But then I remembered the stories I had read about other people who overcame incredible odds to achieve their dreams. I thought, if they could do it, why not me? I started looking for people who could help me, even just a little. That's when I met Camila. She was an English teacher who had studied in the US, and she quickly became more than just a tutor. She became my mentor. Camila didn't just correct my grammar or teach me vocabulary. She believed in me. She listened when I was discouraged, and she reminded me that every mistake I made was proof that I was learning. One of the most powerful things she told me was, "Don't be afraid to sound wrong. Everyone does it first. That's how you grow." That really stuck with me. With her support, I started speaking more, even if I knew I'd mess up. At first, I felt embarrassed. My accent was thick. My sentences were awkward, and sometimes I got completely stuck mid-sentence. But little by little, I noticed it got easier. The more I spoke, the more confident I became. I wasn't fluent yet, but I was no longer afraid of trying. Still, it wasn't all smooth sailing. About halfway through my 6-month journey, I took a practice test, and the results hit me hard. I didn't do well. Honestly, I was crushed. I started thinking maybe I had been unrealistic all along, but Camila wouldn't let me quit. She showed me how far I had come from barely knowing the basics to writing short essays and having real conversations. That perspective helped me shift my focus. This wasn't just about passing a test. It was about proving to myself that I could do something hard. Remotivated, I doubled down. I reminded myself daily why I started. I pushed through the setbacks, and every time I felt like giving up, I looked back at how far I had come and chose to keep going. Around the 3-month mark, I hit a wall. Up until that point, I had been making steady progress learning new words, practicing every day, even starting to have short conversations. But then came the first full practice test. I remember sitting at my desk, nervously flipping through the pages, trying to stay calm. But as I went through each section, reading, writing, listening, speaking, I realized just how far I still had to go. When I saw my score afterward, I was crushed. It was way below what I needed to pass the real exam. That night, I couldn't sleep. All the doubts came rushing in. Maybe I wasn't cut out for this. Maybe I was chasing something impossible. Who was I kidding, thinking I could learn a whole language in 6 months? I felt like I had failed not just the test, but myself. A part of me wanted to walk away, to stop trying, to just accept that this dream wasn't meant for someone like me. But before I made any decisions, I called Camila. She listened quietly as I poured out everything, the frustration, the disappointment, the fear. Then she said something I'll never forget. "You're measuring your journey by one bad day, but that's not the whole story. Look at where you started." She pulled out one of my first writing assignments and read it back to me. It was full of basic vocabulary, broken grammar, and nervous thoughts. gun, she compared it to the essay I had written for the practice test. Far from perfect, but clearer, stronger, more confident. That moment changed everything for me. I realized I had been so focused on the destination that I forgot to appreciate the distance I already traveled. From that point on, I stopped obsessing over perfection and started celebrating progress, no matter how small. I decided to shift gears and get even more serious. I created a more structured routine. I practiced speaking out loud every day, joined online language groups, and made friends from different countries just to talk in English. I forced myself to speak, even when I was nervous or unsure. Every conversation was practice. Every mistake was a lesson. The hard truth is, failure is part of the process. That low test score, it wasn't the end, it was a wake-up call. In a strange way, it gave me what I needed most: clarity. I knew exactly what my weaknesses were, and I finally believed I had the strength to overcome them. The day of the test felt like the final scene along all those months of study, struggling, pushing myself. It all led to this one moment. As I walked into the test center, I could feel the pressure building. People around me looked just as nervous, flipping through notes or sitting in silence. I found my seat, took a deep breath, and reminded myself of everything I'd been through to get here. The first section was reading comprehension. When I opened the booklet, the paragraphs looked overwhelming at first, so many words, unfamiliar topics, but I remembered what Camila had taught me. Break it down. Don't panic. So I took it slow, one question at a time. And little by little, the words started to make sense. I realized I could actually understand most of it. That gave me a huge confidence boost. Then came the writing section. I had practiced writing essays for weeks, and this time I chose a topic that meant something to me: following your dreams. I poured my heart into it, thinking about my journey, my struggles, my hopes. For the first time, writing in English didn't feel like a chore. It felt like telling my story in a new voice. Listening was next, and honestly, it was the part I feared the most. The accents, the speed, the unfamiliar words they used to blur together. But now I found myself catching the main ideas, even when I didn't understand every single word. I remembered all those nights listening to podcasts and songs, training my ear without even realizing it. Finally, it was time for the speaking section. Sitting across from the examiner, my palms were sweating. But once I started talking, something clicked. The words didn't come out perfectly, but they came. I talked about my goals, my learning process, even a funny story about mispronouncing a word at a coffee shop. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid of sounding imperfect. I was just being real. When the test ended, I walked out feeling drained but proud. I had given it my all. The wait for the results was the hardest part, weeks filled with both hope and doubt. But when the envelope finally arrived, and I saw my score, I couldn't believe it. I had passed, not just barely, but with a result that even surprised me. It felt like everything I had worked for finally came together. And for the first time in a long time, I believed in myself fully. After I passed the exam, everything changed, but not in the way I expected. But more than anything, I felt like I had opened the door to a whole new way of living. My relationship with English didn't end with the test. If anything, that was just the beginning. When I arrived in the new country, I was immediately surrounded by English on the streets, in the classroom, even in casual conversations at the bus stop. It was overwhelming at first. People spoke quickly, used slang I hadn't heard before, and sometimes I'd completely miss what someone said. But I saw it all as part of the experience. I kept my small notebook with me everywhere I went, jotting down words I didn't know, phrases I overheard, and anything that felt useful or interesting. I realized that learning a language isn't just about studying, it's about living it. Every time I ordered food, asked for directions, or tried to make a new friend, I was practicing. Every mistake became a learning opportunity. I didn't feel embarrassed anymore. I felt curious. In school, I met people from all over the world: China, Brazil, Germany, Nigeria. We were all from different backgrounds, but we shared the same goal: to learn and grow. We formed a small study group, helping each other with homework, practicing conversations, and sharing stories from home. Through those interactions, I didn't just learn English. I learned how to connect with people on a deeper level. There were still moments of struggle. Sometimes I'd freeze in class when I was called on, or misunderstand an important assignment. But instead of shutting down, I started asking questions. I learned that it's okay to not know everything. What matters is the willingness to try, to ask, to keep moving forward. One of the most meaningful things I did was volunteer at a local community center. They had an English program for newcomers, and I started helping people who were just beginning their journey just like I had months ago. It was surreal, honestly. Teaching them reminded me of my own path, and it gave me a sense of purpose. I wasn't just learning for myself anymore. I was also giving back. This stage of my journey taught me something powerful. Success isn't a finish line. It's a foundation. Every step I took after passing that test helped me grow, not just in English, but as a person. And I knew, without a doubt, that the best was still ahead. Over time, what began as a personal goal, learning English to pass a test, evolved into something much bigger than I ever imagined. As the months turned into years, I realized that this journey wasn't just about a language anymore. It was about transformation. Learning English had unlocked opportunities I never thought possible, not just for travel or education, but for connection, for growth, and for purpose. After finishing my studies abroad, I returned home with the desire to do more. I remembered what it felt like to struggle, to feel lost, to doubt myself. So I decided to start a small language center in my hometown, something I would have desperately needed back when I was just starting out. At first, it was just a few students sitting in a borrowed classroom, but soon word spread. People of all ages came, not just to learn English, but to chase dreams they'd long buried. One student I'll never forget is Leah. She was quiet, determined, and had one goal: to become a doctor. Her English was rough in the beginning, but her work ethic was inspiring. She stayed late after class, asked questions, and pushed herself constantly. Years later, I received a message from her. She had earned a scholarship to a top medical school, and she thanked me for believing in her. But honestly, it was her own grit and resilience that made it happen. Stories like Leah's remind me that education has a ripple effect. One person's breakthrough can inspire a whole community, and what starts as a small act like helping someone pronounce a word can grow into something life-changing. That's the power of education. It's not just about textbooks or exams. It's about belief. It's about reminding people that they are capable of more than they think. Looking back, I'm amazed at how a single decision to try, even when it felt impossible, changed the entire course of my life. If I hadn't taken that first step, I wouldn't have passed the test. I wouldn't have studied abroad. I wouldn't have met Camila, or started teaching, or helped others find their own voices. So, if you're standing at the beginning of your own journey, whether it's learning a language, chasing a goal, or trying something completely new, don't wait for perfect conditions. Start now. Start small. And don't give up when it gets hard. Because the truth is, education doesn't just change your life. it can change the lives of everyone you reach afterward. And that's the real story, one that keeps going, word by word, life by life.